But like marriage, we talked about marriage being created not by man, but by God. Sex was created by God as well. It was not created by the devil, but it was created and ordained by God. We have a societal and cultural viewpoint of sex when we need to have a godly and biblical viewpoint of sex. So, the devil, the world, and our culture may misuse sex, but sex is pure within the confines of marriage.
Welcome back to the Everyday Christian Podcast, where we apply scriptural principles to everyday Christian lives. I'm Sean Sloggett.
And I'm John Rich, and today we're going to discuss death without divorce, 3 ways that you're murdering your marriage. And we're very excited to be with you all again today. Looking forward to what God has in store. It's been a crazy couple of weeks. Death threats from our last podcast episode. Not to us directly, actually to Brother Todd, who was on our previous episode. If you have not heard that episode, go back and listen to it.
Absolutely.
We go in depth. It's about an hour and 30 minute episode. It's a little lengthy, but go listen to it. You will not be disappointed. You get a lot of knowledge and a lot of things going into childhood sexual abuse and how to resolve that in your own life or steps to take to resolve that. And there's a lot to it, obviously. So go back and listen to that episode. You can also follow us on all social media platforms. We're on TikTok, we're on Facebook, we're on Instagram. By searching at podcast for him. I'll put it up there on the screen, but that's at podcast, the number for him. Search us on every podcast platform of your choice by searching The Everyday Christian Podcast. That's the every and day are separate, The Everyday Christian Podcast for all of our episodes, bonus content, and things like that. Okay, we've been doing a series. We started a series actually in our last episode called Things That Christians Never Talk About. And something that we really felt led to discuss here today is actually not just 3 ways you're murdering your marriage, but 3 things that you can do to improve your marriage as well. So it's kind of the best of both worlds in this episode. And there is obviously different variables, different things that we could discuss, go into depth on, but that's every episode. I feel like we could we could go for hours discussing a lot of these things. We wanted to talk about marriage and 3 things that you're doing as a Christian or as a person in general to murder your marriage. One of the biggest misconceptions, Brother Sean, about marriage is that it's something that man invented or that something that man created, but it's not. It goes all the way back to Genesis chapter 2. It talks about a man leaving, his father and his mother and cleaving to his wife or holding fast to his wife and becoming one flesh with her. And, there's a lot of scripture. Proverbs talks about he who finds a wife finds a good thing and obtains favor from the Lord. Marriage is not something that was created by man, but it's actually something that was created by God. It's a shadow of Christ being married to the church, obviously. So everything that God did points to Christ, but I think that that's a misconception a lot of people have outside of the church. I think most people inside of the church probably are aware of this, but a lot of people have this idea that marriage was man-made and therefore there's no sanctity in it or there's no, holiness about it. But that couldn't be farther from the truth. Marriage was ordained and created by God from the very, very beginning.
From the very beginning.
And it is something that is sanctified. It is something that is holy and pure. And we want to go into a lot of things in this episode to help you with your marriage, help you have a fiery marriage. And there's a lot of podcasts out there. If you've ever heard of the Naked Marriage podcast, great podcast to listen to. The Fierce Marriage podcast is a good one to go to as well. There's books upon books upon books on how to help improve your marriage. So I don't feel like we're necessarily telling you something that you just never heard of or never knew, but maybe perhaps adding to a lot of the things that you already know. And let me preface this episode by saying that if you have kids, you should probably put them somewhere else. We're listening to this episode. We try to keep it as clean as possible. There is one point that we're going to discuss. I'm just going to let it right out of the bag. We're going to talk about sex, okay, first and foremost. And we're going to go in, not really deep into the weeds, but we're going to go in depth on sex and marriage. And that's something that Christians don't talk about. So if you're listening with your kids, it'd probably be a good time to set them somewhere else. If you Go have them watch, Teletubbies or something.
The worst show.
Teletubbies has, worst show ever. I couldn't have picked a worse show. Have them go watch
VeggieTales.
VeggieTales.
Come on.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I forgot this was a Christian podcast.
Let's pray for our brother.
Yes, pray for me, please. Go have them watch VeggieTales. Go have them listen to the Donut Man. There you go. I know a little bit, okay? Hank the Cow Dog or something. But this episode is going to have a little bit of adult themes to it, so we just want to warn you beforehand. I don't feel like we did a great job of that in the last episode, but I think with the title alone, you kind of know that, but especially with this one. So let's get right into the first thing that you do to murder your marriage, and that is lack of communication. Breakdown of the lines of communication in marriage is one of the biggest catalysts to a difficult marriage or to a divorce. If you look at studies, if you look at statistics, Brother Sean, that's one of the biggest things that people, I say do, but rather aren't doing, that hurt their marriage is the communication aspect of it.
Yeah, absolutely. In trying to prepare for this, I thought about things that I like to do, and I thought about things that my wife likes to do. And it's whenever you think of communication, and this is something I have to work on, is a lot of times not a lot of times, I'm working on myself on it. It happens. I'll put it that way.
Yeah.
Is when people are communicating with me, talking to me, we try working up a response already.
Yeah.
We're almost pre-programmed.
Yeah.
We're not quite there, but it
Right.
seems we're getting close where you're talking about, my wife loves shopping. What woman doesn't? But when she starts telling me I'm going shopping, I'm thinking, well, I'm going to be staying home. I've got to, I've been working on our yard a little bit. So, my mind's going, I got to move some dirt around. I've got to do all these things. If I were to be completely honest, I didn't really hear my wife.
Yeah.
I heard her start talking, and I heard a word that I don't like,
Yeah.
and I moved on.
Yeah.
I moved on to what I got going on, the things in my life that,
Yeah.
and that's not really communicating.
Right.
Communicating is listening in,
Yeah.
not just so you can have a response ready. We need to respond. A response needs to be had, but it's expressing yourself, but also sitting back and just taking it in a little bit.
Yeah.
Communication, it can be the little things such as shopping and going and playing golf, or whatever it is that you guys like to do. Each their own. But it goes so much deeper than that. And what are our goals in life? What are, what church are we going to go to? What's our plan for this year? Short-term, long-term goals. I've started a side business, so we try to discuss that, what do we want to do short-term? Do we want, we want to have X amount of dollars saved, and the long-term goal is I want to be able to have a truck that's paid cash for, whatever the case may be. And there's things that we need to be in agreement on. But I wonder how many times we try to, in communication, that we just want to see a version of us in the opposite sex.
Yeah.
And this is something that a few weeks ago, I actually had to come to this realization myself between me and my wife. Just like most marriages, we have our ups and downs, and we're not one of those couple that has never fought. I hate,
All right.
I'm going to burst people's bubbles.
Yeah.
You hear people say, I've never fought with my wife ever. And I worry when I hear stuff like that.
Yeah, exactly.
But beside the point, there's give and take to it. There are things you need to be in agreement on, but there's also some things you need to give and take on, not just be listening to it in a higher voice or a lower voice, whatever it is. It's more than a rebuttal. It's understanding what they're saying. It's not always agreeing,
Right.
but it's understanding and being able to work through those things.
One thing in a corporate workplace that I had a couple of years ago is they had like and every workplace has like their core values or their, things that they try to strive and live by. And they had one thing called the coaching tool. And that was where you could do like peer-to-peer coaching or coaching up to a manager or manager down to an employee.
Yeah.
And it was something that always stuck out to me with that. Of course, I don't remember a ton, I do remember quite a bit, but not a ton of that previous job as far as like the coaching tool is concerned. But one thing that always stuck out to me was, whenever you're coaching, is that you should listen to understand instead of listening to react or respond.
Yeah.
And a lot of that goes into marriage. If my spouse, Morgan, I say my spouse, Morgan, everybody knows I'm married to Morgan. If she wants to have a discussion and a conversation, even if it's a heated one, if we go in, and by the way, there's nothing wrong with having a heated conversation, and we'll get into a little bit of that, but there's nothing wrong with having an argument. You're not going to see eye to eye. And that's like you were talking about, Brother Sean, where it's talking, you think of, I want them to see my viewpoint.
Yeah.
I want them to have my mind. I want them to think exactly how I think. And that's never going to work. It's never, ever, ever going to happen. There's going to be disagreements. And so when you have those discussions or when you have those forms of communication, it's always good to listen and understand, because you could be wrong, or, you could, be misguided in certain areas. And I can't tell you how many times Morgan and I have had, heated discussions, whatever you want to call them, arguments, blah, 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 where we've talked about things and talked things through. And it's easy for her to say something and me to react to something she said, or for me to say something and her to react to something I said, because, there's that clash, there's that not understanding each other, there's that,
Right.
wanting each other to think how we think. And it's just, you have to take a step back. Communication is only good when you, instead of trying to put your mind into their mind or put yourself and make it to where they see things how you see them, instead put yourself in their shoes, see where they're coming from with their conversation, see what it is that they're battling, what is the reason why they feel this way about whatever it is. What is the reason why, one thing, and I'm just being kind of open and transparent here, but one thing Morgan and I, it always seems like we have these like heated discussions whenever things just kind of build up.
Right.
And it is always like that. And obviously we strive for it to be, better than that. We strive to just have that communication ongoing constantly to where, we don't have to have it build up and bottleneck and then all of a sudden it just explodes. So we always try to discuss things with one another, and we always try to go through certain things together. But what happens is we'll, she'll say something, I'll say something. She'll believe or think one way, I'll think and believe one way, until all of a sudden it just, like I said, bottlenecks, it explodes. Yeah. And then all of a sudden we're having that heated discussion where A, it could have been resolved, way before that. And B, if it gets to that point, we have to have an attitude of listening to understand.
Yeah. It's, the communication goes down to the smallest things. I like sports.
Yeah.
I mean, I've played basketball a lot growing up. I enjoy watching basketball and football and these things. And it would be easy for Jay to, and things like this has happened. We're not perfect, and I'm not tearing my wife down at all.
Yeah.
I'll tear myself down here in a minute if you'll hold on. I'll get home from work and I'll just be exhausted and tired. I've worked 2 jobs today and all this is going on, and I had to deal with all these customers, and life goes on, and I'll get home and be a a football game going on, and I'll just sit down on the couch and just turn it on and be sitting there watching on my phone or whatever. And in passing by, I didn't start with me. I didn't tell her I had a rough day.
Yeah.
I didn't tell her what all was going on.
Right.
I just came home and I'm sitting on the couch.
Yeah.
You know, so when she walks by, they're like, "You're watching stupid football again."
Yeah.
You know, and it could have been resolved if I'd have walked in and be like, "Baby,
Had a hard day. Yeah.
I've been exhausted today. I didn't sleep well last night because Cicely was sick and she was in my back, and I've just been running nonstop today. And can I have 15, 30 minutes? You know, let me watch a quarter or whatever. Just sit down and just take them." And she would understand.
Yeah.
She does understand those things. You know, she loves Hallmark movies. I can't stand them. It's the dumbest thing.
Amen, brother.
Do we need to
I hate 'em
just
too,
talk
yeah.
about
Just
no?
go into Hallmark bashing movies.
And you know, I mock her sometimes. I'll go over there and be like, you know, what small town are we in tonight? You know, has it started snowing yet? Because they're all it's all the same thing.
Absolutely. There's always snow.
There's always snow. If the girl or the guy came from the big city, you know, it's all.
Yeah.
But without talking about it, you know, from the outside, from me saying those things about Hallmark movies or her walking in, and she doesn't just watch them all the time, but, you know, her walking by and seeing me watch, you know, a quarter of a football game, or just those little thoughts, those little words, you know, another football game.
Yeah.
And you know, she's irritated.
Yeah.
Because she spent all day with the kids. You know, she had to go grocery shopping. In her mind, Sean will be home in 20 minutes and I'll be able to take a break.
Right.
And she walks in to me just kicked back on the couch. I've already taken my shoes off. I forgot to take the trash to the road because it's trash night. You know, in her mind, I've just walked away from all the situations. And that can be the very start of that, where it bottlenecks. It doesn't have to be anything whatsoever. Right. But just those small things, you know, we've talked, me and my wife have grown a lot these last several months. Which it's not football season now, but towards the end of football season, you know, she'd walk in there and she'd see me watching a football game on Thursday night or whatever it was. And she'd say, "Is your team playing tonight?" "No, not tonight. Justin Herbert, you know, from the Chargers, he's playing."
Like this guy on the team,
and,
you know.
And she'd be like, "Oh, we're from the Northwest. We're from Oregon." She'd say, "Is he one of those guys from where you grew up?" Like, yeah, he actually lived 3 hours from, you know, whatever the case. She's just engaging with me.
Yeah.
She's saying, "Hey, listen, let's talk for a minute."
Yeah.
She could care less what team Justin Herbert plays for. I could go to her and tell her that Derek Carr just left the Raiders, and I don't remember where he went to now.
Yeah, no one knows.
I could think if I thought about it. But anyway, she doesn't care.
Yeah.
But she cares about me.
Right.
And she knows that's one of my interests.
Yeah.
You know, so and I still have to work on watching Hallmark movies with her, but you know, I'm working on.
No, that's one thing I draw the line.
She sees my side of it. I don't quite see her side of it yet. You know, but communication it's those small words, but it's also, you know, you can communicate without even having to say that.
Yeah.
This is where I'm going to open myself up here. We had one of those heated conversations a few weeks back. Some very strong opinions were said, both sides. You know, there was some. It just got intense. You know, like me and my wife. You know, the perfect non-fighting couple. But I told her towards the end of it, I said, "I just need you right now." Yeah. After all the yelling, after all the screaming, after why I don't like this and she likes it, but she thinks it needs to be this way. And then I just told her, I said, "I got so much going on right now. I just need you."
Yeah.
And she has always been by my side. Jay has always been by my side. I don't feel like she's ever walked away or stepped back and made me fight battles on my own. I was just in a very vulnerable position.
Right.
And it was because I wasn't communicating to her.
Yeah.
I was letting this situation and that situation and things going on at this job and things going on the side job, and the fact that I've been trying to deal with this realtor, and that, just everything was building up, and her lights aren't working on the back of her car. I've been trying to find them, and it's going to cost like $700 to replace 2 bulbs. Just all these things just kept and I was just, I'm going to be the man. I'm going to fight it. I wasn't communicating with her. And I finally just told her, it was my fault. I said, I just need you right now.
Yeah.
And she was sitting on the bed. I was standing up. And she moved over. She was sitting kind of on the other side of the bed. And she just moved over. And she said, okay. And she wrapped me up in her arms.
Yeah.
And I sat there and bawled like a baby for a while. I cry sometimes.
Sheesh. I didn't know that.
That was, yeah, you've never seen me cry. That was communication.
Yeah.
I said, I need you because all these things are going on. Even though we're fighting, even though we disagree right now, we still love each other. But I need you right now. Right. And her wrapping her arms around me said more that spoke greater volumes than if she would have said, I'm here for you.
Yeah.
I mean, she was saying that. She wrapped me up, said, I got you.
Yeah.
I am in your corner.
Right. There's a lot of, we talk about the verbal communication. There's a physical communication too. We're going to get into some of that. I already told you in the beginning, we're going to talk about sex. But I think that, to your point, you're talking about, it's almost how men and women are programmed. Men are programmed to just hold things in. I don't know why. That's just how we are. And I think that it kind of goes both ways.
We want to fix it. We want it to be.
We want to fix it all right now. We hold it in. And that's the other thing is, like, we don't want to burden other people. We just want to. We know we can do it. We know we can fix it. We know we can straighten it out. And I think that it's sort of a two-way street there. When it comes to communication, you can't, as a wife, you need to understand where your husband's coming from. And we're obviously on here trying to explain we're not perfect. We need to be more open, clearly. But at the same time, on the reverse of that, as a wife, try to understand that there's a lot of things that we hold in. There's a lot of things that we, probably should let out that we don't let out. And there's a lot of things we should discuss that we don't discuss. And shame on us for that. And at the same time, hopefully, wives, if you're listening, try to understand that we don't do those things just to be, petty or do those things with ill intentions. We just do it. And on the flip side of that, when it comes to wives, wives, I've noticed, I feel like every part of this is vulnerable, and Morgan's going to kill me if she sees this or listens to it. But women, they communicate and they're very open about their feelings in more ways than just words.
Yep.
So, you can tell, I can tell when Morgan's upset about something. It doesn't, and she doesn't have to say anything. In fact, that's mainly the reason why.
Everything's fine.
Everything's fine. I'm like, are you okay? We're cool. I'm like, no, we're not. Let's do this thing. Let's talk about it right now. And I think that one point I'm trying to make with that is the level of trust in communication. When you talk about communication, you can vocally speak, you can have the physical communication, vocally speak, by the way, obviously vocally and speak. But you can have that physical communication. You need to build a level of communication up so great that trust is built. And when that trust is built, you communicate with one another without communicating with one another. That sounds so crazy. It sounds so out there. But trust in communication has to be built up so great that when you're down, your wife knows about it. When she's down, you know about it. When you've got an issue or you think one way about a certain circumstance, they know what you're thinking. I'm not saying all the time that's how it's going to be.
Not that they agree
Not
either,
that they agree either.
but they know.
They know, and they, you know, and that obviously comes. We're both in our 30s. You know, we're not anywhere near where we're going to be when we're in our 50s, married. You know, for what'll it be? 20, 30 years, something like that.
20.
20 years? No, 30. I don't know how long it'll be. Anyway,
3 plus 2. We're gonna have a little math lesson.
I got married at 20.
3
and so if
plus
I'm
2
50,
is 5.
I get married at 20, so I'm 50. It's 30 years, right? Is that math correct? Anyway, once we get to that point,
He didn't go to public school.
I was homeschooled, as you can tell.
That makes it
I
better.
was so homeschooled. But that is one thing that you have to work at. You know, every part of the things that we're going to talk about here today, you have to work at. You have to listen, understand. You have to try to avoid harsh words and petty comebacks. You have to decide before you even have a difficult conversation that you should choose to be civil. You have to understand that holding this phone in your hand while you're discussing with your wife is not communication, or looking down at your phone while you're talking with your husband or wife is not communication. There's a lot of things, there's a lot of keys that go into communication, but the more you build it, the more you work at it, the better it's going to be, the easier it's going to be. And you guys can talk to each other without talking to each other. As hard as that is to understand, the more you grow in marriage. And I think that's a big part too, you know, Brother Sean. We're fixing to get into my favorite part of this episode. But and I know you got a couple things to say, but that's a big part of it too is I think I'm trying to think of who it was. It might have been Jordan Peterson or Ben Shapiro, one of those guys that I like listening to. We're talking about marriage, and it actually might have been like a round table discussion all those guys were having. But they were talking about how, you know, when you marry your spouse young, you grow together, and that's why, you know, a lot of your, you know, couples that get married at an older age, they quickly divorce is because they're so set in their ways. Whereas when you're married, and I'm not getting into all that. I'm not telling you that I'm taking a side in that discussion, but I do think there's a lot to that. When you get married at a younger age, like you and I did, you're not mature yet. But when you grow together, you're maturing together. You're discovering each other together. And
Jay just raised me how she needed me.
There is a movie out there called, I think it's like How to Train Your Dog, and it literally it's like in the 50s or something. Morgan showed me it once, and I was like, that's it. I'm not ever doing this. But it's like this lady in the movie. She has a book of dog tricks, and she says, if you do this with your dog, you know, it'll train him how to do whatever. Well, she takes it and trains her husband this way, and her husband does whatever she wants because she used this book of how to train her dog. Anyway, there's a long way to get around all that, but to that point. But you know, whenever you do that, marriage is growing together. Marriage is learning things together, and communication is a huge part of that.
Something that I'll tie into the end of this is in learning and growing, you know, from the young age or whatever it may be. We don't quite always comprehend this. We know this, but we don't think about it a lot. Is I know Jay better than anybody else.
Right.
She knows me better than anybody else. She knows my strong points.
Right.
She knows my weak points. You know some of my strong and weak points. You know, and again, I know some of yours.
Yeah.
But not like our spouse does. Right. It would be very, very easy for us to have an argument going on. And if you're not careful, you know those weak points, you know those things, and you could just throw something out and just, I can humble her right now if I had to.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we have to be so careful with that, not that in our communication, we're not
right.
Trust. You do something like that, man, it's going to be hard to get trust back.
Yeah.
You know, it's going to make somebody, if your spouse needs to come to you to have a conversation, she's going to think about that for a long time.
Oh, yeah.
Last time I went to him with an issue, or him or her or whoever it was, they just tore me down and made me feel like an idiot.
Yeah.
You know, it's so that trust has to be built, but it can be tore down so fast.
Yes.
how you communicate. I'll kind of work this in and let you go. How you communicate is very important. Most people have read the book on the 5 love languages.
Yeah.
You know, it's words of affirmation, acts of service, receiving gifts, quality time, or physical touch. Most of us know what ours is. I can tell you what my love language is.
Yeah.
The question is, do you know what your spouse's love language is? One of mine is receiving gifts.
Yeah.
I would come when we hadn't been married very long, and I was always buying Jay stuff. You know, sometimes I come home with just a box of chocolates or a dozen roses or, you know, something real simple. And she appreciated it, but it wasn't really what spoke to her.
Yeah.
But in my mind, not acts of service, but receiving gifts was something that worked for me. So surely it'll work for you. And it wasn't.
Yeah.
One of hers is quality time.
Yeah.
And I had to learn that.
Right.
I can buy her, unless I'm buying her a new Tahoe or something, you know, it's not really going to impress her that much. She's been asking for a Tahoe. If I showed up with one of those, receiving gifts might be up there. But I'm not just going to be able to go home, you know, once a week and bring her a dozen roses or whatever.
Yeah.
Your spouse may be that way. Your husband, your wife may be that person. But I had to learn hers is quality time. Instead of showing up with things for her, she would much rather I get home, we eat dinner, do whatever we're doing. We sit down on the couch together and watch a little show.
Yeah.
Or we sit down together and I put my arm around her, and there's been times we have just sat down and not spoke a word to each other. Just I'll put my arm around her, she'll put her hand on my leg or whatever, and we'll just sit there.
Yeah.
Because that's her thing. That's part of communicating with her. That's part of growing with her.
Right.
And that doesn't speak to me all that much. A lot of times, I'm sitting there with her. She probably has nothing in mind. But I'm like, well, I got to get up at 6 o'clock in the morning because I got to go do that cleanup job before I go to the store. My mind's running 100 miles an hour. I am nowhere to be found.
Yeah.
But it speaks to her. So that's what I'm doing for her.
I feel like in this episode, we may actually break this into 2 separate episodes because we're like 30 some odd minutes into the first point, and we haven't even gotten to our main thing that Christians never talk about, but something that's murdering your marriage, and that's sex. So, or the lack thereof. I don't know why it is, but sex is extremely taboo and hush-hush in Christianity. Yet it is necessary for a successful marriage. And there are several reasons, why we avoid discussing sex or the topic of sex. One of the main reasons we avoid it is because of our viewpoint of sex. It's worldly, or it maybe consciously or subconsciously we think that it's something of the devil, whatever.
Yeah.
But like marriage, we talk about marriage being created not by man, but by God. Sex was created by God as well. It was not created by the devil, but it was created and ordained by God. We have a societal and cultural viewpoint of sex when we need to have a godly and biblical viewpoint of sex. So, the devil, the world, and our culture may misuse sex, but sex is pure within the confines of marriage. Firstly, sex was ordained between a husband and a wife, man and woman. We could go a whole podcast on that. Things that Christians ever talk about, maybe. But God designed marriage in such a way that offers a couple enjoyment through having a deep friendship, being sexually intimate, sharing lifelong experience, having a family, and so on. We could go into depth on why sex should only be enjoyed between a husband and wife, and there's a really good chance that we will later on. But sex is between a husband and a wife, not between a husband and multiple wives, not between a wife and a man on the side, but between one and the other, between male and female, husband and wife. The Bible says in Hebrews 13, marriage is honorable in all, and the bed undefiled, but whoremongers and adulterers God will judge. The Bible also says in Proverbs 5:15, it says, "Drink waters out of thine own cistern, and running waters out of thine own well. Let thy fountains be dispersed abroad, and rivers of water in the streets. Let them be only thine own, and not strangers with thee. Let thy fountain be blessed, and rejoice with the wife of thy youth. Let her be as the loving hind in pleasant roe. Let her breast satisfy thee at all times, and be thou ravished always with her love." Yeah, Sean's over here giving me the eyebrow eyebrow raise here. But we discussed a moment ago that communication can be verbal as well as physical. Sex is the physical side of communication, and it is needed, Brother Sean, to have a successful marriage. Let me make this comment because I know we're discussing killers of marriage. You can be your marriage can be dead even though you aren't divorced. I'm going to say that again. Your marriage can be dead even though you aren't divorced. Just because you're trying to follow God's command and stay with your spouse does not mean that you have a successful, thriving, or a desired marriage. And what a pitiful place that can be. We're not condoning divorce when it comes to this type of discussion, but what I am saying is that lack of divorce does not mean great marriage. Marriage must be worked. It must be intentional. You can be a Christian. I'm gonna say this again. You can be a Christian and enjoy sex with your spouse. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing.
You're not backsliding.
You're not backsliding. There's nothing
lock the doors.
unbiblical about it. We try to hush hush. We try to keep it taboo. We try to say it's an evil or bad thing. It's not an evil thing.
We understand why it's hush hush. We're not trying to just run around and talk about it to everybody. And hey, you're 14. Well, do you know about? You should know about. That's not what we're trying to get with this. We
it's
understand.
hard. I mean, just on this podcast alone, it is hard to discuss, and we're not even around other people. We're just talking with each other.
Yes, but as spouses, these things need to be talked about. We're not. Young couples getting married need to know about this.
Right.
Again, I'm not saying that they need to have classes on it or, by classes, I mean, learning things.
Yeah.
We're not saying those things, but we've got people who are growing up that God ordained something. God said this is a good thing. God blesses it.
Yeah.
And then we've got young Christians or others that, maybe you're not Christians, or that are getting married and have no idea what's going on.
Yeah.
And then they're confused, or, she ends up pregnant, and then they were struggling financially before, and now they've got another one on the way, and it's going to make it that much harder. These things need to be discussed so people understand.
Right.